Hey folks, it's Mira Dessy, the Ingredient Guru, and I am here with more prepared pantry tips for you. These are strategies to help you deal with your food supply and feeding your family while we are all going through this time of sheltering in place, limited trips to the grocery store, possibly limited supplies at the grocery store, depending on where you are and what's available. And I wanted to share some more tips with you to help you manage mealtime. So today's topic is leftovers. And this is actually something really important because we have an enormous amount of food waste in this country. There are a lot of ways that food gets wasted. Part of it is simply by what we grow that is not delivered to the consumer, either because it doesn't meet consumer need or of how it's grown and there's some sort of damage or processing or whatever. And then we also have food that is thrown out from the grocery store because they don't manage to sell it. And then there's also a very large category of food that is thrown out because people make a meal and perhaps they don't eat the leftovers. And some of that may be due to getting bored with having the same thing. I mean, let's face it, you make a huge vat of chili, you only want to eat that so many days. Another reason is because there are some people who haven't learned to eat leftovers, and so once they've made something, they just throw everything out. The challenge is 40% of the food that is grown in America is never eaten. It's actually thrown away. It contributes considerably to the landfill. That comes to approximately 130 billion pounds in the US alone at a cost of approximately $160 billion, which is an enormous amount of money. The last statistics that I saw indicated that that figure translates to approximately $1,600 per family. $1,600 per year thrown in the trash. That's an awful lot of money to throw out. And so I wanted to talk to you about some ideas for things that you could do to manage your leftovers, and that way perhaps not throw out quite so much food, but also to make sure that your family is enjoying what you're making. One of my first tips is to look at how you store food after you've made a meal a little bit differently. The traditional method is you make a meal, and I'm just going to make one up here. So let's say you make a roast, and then you have a side of sweet potatoes, and then you have a side of a green veg. And at the end of the meal, when you're packaging it all up, the meat goes in one thing, and the veg goes in one, and the sweet potatoes go in another. So you have three containers in the refrigerator. And that's fine, but it means everybody who wants to serve themselves a meal has to pull out all the containers, go through, serve themselves, put everything back. What I prefer to do is to make individual serving sized meals. And you can do that either by putting them in a wide mouth pint canning jar, making like a meal jar, or if you have glass containers that are meal sized, you can make individual meals. So in each container, you put the meat and the two sides, and that way you have a complete meal that you can pull out and reheat. This is also really convenient if you find that you have more leftovers than you know what to do with. You can label them and put them in the freezer, and then you have a complete meal ready to pull out and to reheat. So that's definitely much better in terms of being able to manage your leftovers. One of the other things that's really important is to look at ways to reuse what you're cooking. Part of the challenge, like I said, that chili, for example, you're going to get tired of things after a certain amount of time. And so looking for ways to perhaps modify what you're doing. I will say when I make a big vat of chili or a big batch of tomato sauce or whatever, I always make a lot because it's easy to make a lot, but then I take about half of it and put it in the freezer to use later. That way I'm saving cooking time, but I'm also ensuring that it won't go bad before we can eat it. However, when I'm making other things, for example, a roast chicken or a roast or, some lamb chops or whatever, they're looking for ways to reuse those. And that's what I call planned leftovers. It's a leftover management plan so that you are not serving the same meal over and over again to your family. For example, if you make a chicken, and I will share, right now our household is just two people. It's me and my husband. But at one point we had three kids in the house. So when we had three kids in the house, I would roast two chickens at a time. and then have a plan for all of those leftovers. And with leftover chicken, you can do things like make a pot pie, you can make enchiladas, you can make a number of different things with it, but knowing what you're going to make. So one of the things that happens is, in addition to making a meal plan and figuring out what you're going to cook, part of that meal should include your leftover plan, knowing how you're going to modify what you're making. And with a chicken, you can also make a soup. For example, last night our family had a turkey lentil veg soup with the last leftover bits of turkey, and I threw some sprouted lentils in there and then a whole bunch of vegetables and made a really delicious soup. And that's a great way to use up a little bit of meat and not get, not have that last little bit where you're like, what do I do with it? And speaking of soup, using the bones is always a really good idea. You can, and I'll put the recipe down below, but you can make a nourishing broth with chicken or poultry. You can also do it with beef and other things. There's actually a really great book about bone broth that I'll include as well. So that's certainly one way to take a chicken and turn it into, a whole chicken turns into a pot pie, possibly turns into a soup, like a rich soup, and then taking the bones and making a broth with it. And so you're getting full use of that and not wasting food and not feeding your family the same thing over and over again. You can do the same thing with a roast, for example. You have your roast and then you can chop it up. I will sometimes take the roast and run it through the food processor so it makes it a little bit smaller, and use that as the meat in a chili instead. Nobody says that you have to use only ground meat in a chili, so that's definitely one way to reuse it. You can also use it to make something like a hash, or you can make some kind of other dish with it. But again, looking at how your family likes to eat, what are the kinds of things they like to eat, and then how can you plan to manage your leftovers. The goal is to be able to save money, save food, not be bored with what you're eating, and make sure that you're managing what's in your pantry and what's in your home. And with a lot more people at home right now and a lot more people cooking, I want to make sure that you have some of these ideas so that we are not throwing out food, because I think as more people are learning to cook or choosing to cook at home, there may be more food waste. So these strategies are some ways to help prevent that from happening and to hopefully get back some of that $1,600 for your family instead of throwing it in the trash. If you have any questions or you need some ideas or suggestions, please let me know. You can put it down in the comments below, and please make sure that you tag me so that I can see it, and I'm happy to respond to that. And then please stay tuned. I will be back with more tips later. Thanks for watching, folks. Bye.